It was just a normal day, really. Me going downstairs to do my laundry in the middle of the night, as usual. On the way down, I ran into a nurse working in the building. And we started chit-chatting, and she asked me who have I spent time with lately, who might be my favorite neighbor, etc. Then suddenly, just like that, I found out that one of my neighbors, someone I used to watch TV in the corridor, had died a few days back. This is just one example from day-to-day life while living in an old folks' home in Helsinki. Of course, I have happier memories from that time than sad ones like this, but you might say that death is always present in places like my former home. And naturally, people die in all kinds of apartment buildings, but the possibility to face death in an old folks' home is much higher than in a place someone like me would normally live. For Western kids like me, I think death, the shadow-like figure wearing a black cape, usually appears to be a distant and a scary thing. I dare to say that most people of my own age are afraid of death, since it follows us and our loved ones up when we least expect it. Just as it did for my older friend, who always greeted me so happily when I sat next to her to watch some TV. Anyway, we have a system in Finland where we have the elderly people to live in their own homes, and we throw them into facilities where they're never seen again before they're placed underground. But there used to be a time when the concept of family was much broader. The grandparents also belonged to the family, and they usually lived under the same roof with their children, grandchildren, and so on. And people also died at home, surrounded by their family, which I think is one reason why people face death more often in their lives. But nowadays, it seems to be a very different story. Last autumn, I moved into a building with around 120 elderly people and 2 people of my own age. And the deal went like this. My rent was much cheaper than the normal market price, and in return, I was expected to spend 3 to 5 hours a week with my elderly neighbors. The way I spent time with them was completely up to me. So, as you can imagine, I ended up hearing the same old stories of the Second World War over and over again. But I also heard the most interesting stories, the happy ones and the sad ones. With my neighbors, I went to the museum, different restaurants, and even drank a glass of sparkling wine on the top of a hotel at the railway station. Normally, I would just go knock on one of my neighbors' door and ask, "Do you want to hang out?" And the response was usually, "Yes, come on in." But I know that there are many valid reasons why these days we don't live with our parents after we become adults. But at the same time, loneliness, isolation, and exclusion are growing problems in our society, both for young and old. And that's why I think we need new ways of thinking, new ideas how to bring people who wouldn't normally have opportunities to interact together. And the project I was part of is one way to do it, but definitely not the only one. Often when I told someone that I live in an old folks' home, the response was usually something like, "Oh, that's great! How nice of you to spend time with grannies. That's such an important work you do." But then it got me thinking, if it is so great and such an important thing, why couldn't more people do the same? And I'm not saying that everyone should run out now and call their parents or grandparents or parents-in-law perhaps and move back in with them, because that could be tough, right? I just want everyone to think why things are like they are and consider, does it have to be like this? Since nowadays in Finland, the government wants the elderly people to live in their own homes as long as possible, would it be possible for a young adult and a granny to become roommates, for instance? Or could there be more apartments available in old folks' homes for students, so that there could be more interaction between the old and young, and maybe one new solution for the student and youth housing problems? One of my neighbors put in words really nicely. She wished that the young people like me could be like the sun for them, to bring joy and passion for living back to their lives. Another neighbor enjoyed talking about something else than pills and aching body parts all day long. But all in all, I think young can bring change in perspective for the old people. But my experience tells me that it works the other way around as well. So the young can bring in new kind of life that wouldn't normally exist in our old folks' home, for instance. And the old in return can teach us about a very different kind of life and what it means to become old and also to die. However, some might wonder if young and old people have anything in common, but I dare to say that yes, we do. Of course, we come from different times, and we might have different opinions, but eventually I think everybody is young from the inside, and in some ways nobody really feels themselves to be old. With my older friends, I have many conversations about TV shows, politics, drinking, sex, and of course, death. One of the lessons I learned from my neighbors is that death isn't always a bad and a horrible thing. I saw firsthand how death is natural, and sometimes it can also be merciful. I heard many times elderly people saying how they wished they could finally leave this place, and joking about not going to live long anymore. Hearing such things can be shocking at first, but then you realize that there comes a time for most of us when our lives aren't anymore what they used to be. On top of that, spending almost a century on this planet might be quite tiring for anyone. At that point, the one scary figure might appear to be quite friendly, and you might be able to face death as equals, so to speak. And that attitude towards death may be the most important lesson I learned from my neighbors. Thank you.